All right, I am excited here today. We've got Troy Miller with us, President and CEO of the NRB, or National Religious Broadcasters. Troy, thank you for being with us today.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So, I want to share a little bit with the audience just to start with. Tell us a little bit about the NRB. They know that we've been going to a convention every year for a number of years now. So, share a little bit about what the NRB is, and then we'll kind of get into a little bit more this morning.
So the NRB has been around for over 80 years. It started as a organization to, help Christians who wanted to get on radio back in 1944 when radio was the big medium. There was a group that wanted to be the, quote, gatekeepers, as well as the radio broadcasters, the major station owners. They wanted to really limit what Christians could do on radio. So a group of pastors got together at Moody Church and started the NRB, National Religious Broadcasters, really to just advocate and work to have anybody who wanted to be in Christian broadcasting or be in the public square with their message. And for 80 years, that's what we've been working hard on, to make sure Christians can be in the public square, be on all the major media outlets that God has called them to be on. And then, as you said, we work really hard with ministries to help them to do excellence in their ministry. Whatever they're doing, they can do it with excellence. We have the largest gathering of Christian communicators anywhere in the world. We do that once a year. Next year, we'll be in Nashville, Tennessee in February. And so that's really kind of at the core of what we do.
Well, I appreciate that. And that has been, a big thing that most people don't realize. If they're listening to Christian radio or even, other means now, a lot to deal with the film industry and TV broadcasts and all those things. You guys have had a very big part of just keeping the doors open for ministries like ours to be able to do this. So I appreciate what you guys do. And yes, those who've never been, we've been to the convention a number of years now. And it's just an exciting week. I mean, it's just amazing what is there. But it has been encouraging. Well, the reason why we've really got you on is we got excited. You guys have done a pretty big research with Barna Research, which our audience and our members know a lot about Barna. We have been involved with Barna Research and a major study on Gen Z that we've had a lot of interaction with as well. So when I saw the study come out and saw what you guys did there, it just so much coincides with, again, as we mentioned before we jumped on here, our target audience is that younger audience and what that looks like. So tell us a little bit about what brought this together, to reach out to Barna to kind of do this. So what was the idea behind trying to do this research?
Yeah, I really wanted to get a good understanding, going forward. You want to sort of set some benchmarks, some post, and as we move forward with some of the things we want to do here, wanted to get an understanding what kind of impact is Christian media having today. So what's the impact that Christian media is having? And we specifically wanted to look at the impact it was having outside of the local church, because we know a lot of people might watch their local pastor, stream, or watch their pastor's podcast or a Bible study from their church. Well, we want to see the impact outside of the church. So that was the main driver behind this study. And we had some pretty, as you said, I'll be honest, some pretty surprising numbers pop up here.
Yeah, I know one of the things that started off kind of where I noticed that it mentioned the fact that the consumers, there's a little bit more about that younger generation getting involved in it. What did you see in that, the younger generation actually looking for Christian broadcasting?
Yeah, so one of the numbers that popped up, I'm just going to hit a top one really quick, that popped off of right away, was the fact that 60% of the general population, so this is the not just asking Christians, the general population of America, 60% of them tune into some form of Christian media, use some form of Christian media. And then, as you said, the number that really got us when you drilled down into that number was that the high number that 64% of Gen Zers interact with Christian media, mainly social media, but Christian content on social media, 64%. And then right behind them was 58% of millennials. And so two of our younger adult generations right now, millennials and Gen Zers, were actually the highest interacting with Christian media, which kind of breaks the stereotype that Christian media is mainly, for quote, older folks.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. And when I saw those numbers, I was excited as well as surprised about that. So when you saw that, what's the conversation now taking place with you and your team and the organization now that you're seeing that? What were some things that popped up in y'all's conversation when you saw these numbers?
Well, first of all, look, we were excited. I mean, that's very excited to look at that and know that such a high percentage of the younger adults are interacting with Christian media in some way. But when you take it with some of the other data that was in the survey itself, when you looked at that nearly 60%, two-thirds, 66% of the population viewed Christian media as valuable and trustworthy. And then for Christians, that went up to 80%. So Christians felt Christian media was valuable and trustworthy, but also that 60% of Christians, media users, use it as an alternative to the mainstream media, And so you take that along with the top thing the top reason that people said that they go to Christian media, that was to find hope and encouragement. So I think a few things that we took away from this study overall was, especially as it relates to the younger generation, is first of all, it doesn't appear that they're buying the mainstream media messages out there. It doesn't look like they're saying, oh yeah, we got this whole secular kind of message and we're 100% into it. That's not true at all. With such a high 64%, nearly two-thirds. I mean, that's just about two-thirds of the Gen Zers using Christian media. It says they're looking for an alternative. They're looking for they're rejecting the mainstream media's message. And again, I think that's really encouraging, that we often think these young adults are kind of a bit indoctrinated in robots, but they're really not. They're really looking for the truth and looking for honesty in programming.
Yeah, I definitely, we've seen that. In fact, the other study I was referring to, there was numbers that were exceeding that 70% of the Gen Zers who believe everybody's lying to them and they're just looking for the truth. So that was exciting to be able to see that, again, that they're looking. And so that makes it really important for somebody to be portraying the truth and getting that out there. But I did notice in there, again, there seems to be a little bit of skepticism coming into that as well, as far as, they're looking and going, yeah, you're telling us you're saying the truth, but there's still some skepticism. What are you seeing as far as that's concerned? How do we address there's still a little bit of skepticism in what they're hearing, whether it's in secular media or in Christian media?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're getting a lot of counter messaging. That's what we have to remember, too. In today's age, you've got billions almost of voices out there talking to people. So there are, as you said, they're more skeptical in their thinking. But look, the number two reason why they tune into Christian media, that was another one I thought was pretty telling. And that was to know how to love God better and people better. And so it wasn't just like I'm kind of seeking, looking, I'm kind of trying to find. And then right behind that was to know their Bible better. And so they're actually looking, as you said, for authentic, actual truth. And I think the message that comes out of that for us as Christian communicators, that we have a huge responsibility. I mean, we start off on a good foot with that many people finding Christian media trustworthy, but we have a huge responsibility to live up to that trustworthiness, to be honest in our reporting, not to do what the mainstream media does, not to hype things up, not to report or do this whole idea of fear mongering. We can't be that kind of media. We have to be very authentic to these young adults and very openly honest to them. And I think the other thing that when you look in there, some of the numbers, they want honesty. They don't want to be coddled. They want honesty in what you're telling them. So that's a big responsibility for us.
Yeah, I think in seeing that, that's kind of what we've been seeing as we go through this, that as we present the truth, we don't need to sensationalize it. I believe the truth is so much its own sensationalism because it's so unique to what is being out there
Right.
in general. There doesn't need to be any additional, hey, I got to make this sound even more. I mean, the truth's so significant. So in those numbers, obviously, so what is it? How's that translated in? We mentioned the fact even just potentially broadcasting the news, having that alternative, as well as how are you seeing it across the board? Obviously, most people think of Christian radio as music, which obviously we do portray music, but what is it that we're seeing in programming or news broadcast, or what does that look like? What is the mix, or how do you feel like that should be presented to continue to reach this audience and hold them?
Well, first, I would say that look, these numbers are saying that Christian media is doing a pretty good job at that, of having a well-balanced message out there between music and Christian talk and teach. The numbers, some of the responses, it was amazing. We didn't get as many responses about the Christian music, although we know Christian music is very popular because we can look at just even secular kind of magazines in the industry, radio numbers. Christian music is constantly either in the second or third, of top genres that people listen to out there. So we know Christian music's very popular, and they should maintain what they're doing. But Christian talk and teach here, I think, again, I think the message for Christian talk and teach is one, don't believe people when they say the younger generation's not tuning in. If you think they're not tuning in, you're missing the boat, because they're tuning in and they're listening. One of the things that we've been working on, I'll be talking a lot more about for Christian programmers, is you really need to have a multi-generation strategy in your programming. So you need to make sure that your programming is strategized for multiple generations. So you're not just demographically reaching one group. And so there's a number of different ways to do that, but especially if you're traditional radio or if you're just a podcaster, understand that most of these millennials and Gen Zers were tuning in through social media. So do you have a social media strategy? Do you have a TikTok strategy? Do you have an Instagram strategy? And so on. Do you have these strategies to meet these younger people on the media platforms that they're on?
Good. Yeah. And that's so true because, again, when we talked about before we jumped on, to have of so many of the different social media platforms that are out there, as well as the traditional means of broadcast, because reaching all generations, in fact, that's been our emphasis. One of our core values is to reach all generations. And so there is an aspect that you still have an older generation that I think from a biblical standpoint, in fact, I know the responsibility is to teach that younger generation. So holding their attention to be able to say, hey, look, it's your responsibility. I say yours. I'm of that age now. It's our responsibility now to reach this younger generation. So to be able to make that connection, I think, is really vital because it pertains to so many aspects of life. Other part of that study that I thought was interesting that you guys included was the impact it makes on politics. Now that gets real touchy in some circles, but that's a part of life. That's a thing that obviously, if you watch any mainstream media, it is like forefront, right in front of you, knocking you off of your seat. It's so powerful. What aspect of that makes a difference in that aspect of our day-to-day life in dealing with politics?
Yeah, and let me give a background there a little bit, because one of the things we were looking at in that kind of bottom series of questions, and since this survey was done right on the heels of the 2024 election, that was why we chose to look at politics. What we were trying to look at was okay, we know there's a big impact. Christian media people are tuning in. But is just tuning into Christian media enough, or is it having an impact on people that they're actually living out their worldview? And we're actually going to drill down deeper into that in our next round of studies. But this round, we looked at that, and to try to ask that question: is the Christian media you're tuning in having an impact? Well, there was nothing better to gauge that than on the heels of the 2024 convention, and really 75% of voters who use Christian media, who are Christian media users, they said that Christian media influenced how they decided to vote. So 75% of the Christian media users, that had an influence on their worldview, how they voted, how they lived out their Christian worldview in the governance of this country. 40% of people heard messages about the elections from either their pastors or leaders. And 2/5 of general Americans recall hearing leaders talk about the election. So we looked at that and said, okay, yeah, there is a big group tuning in, but there's also a big group that's tuning in, and then they're acting on what they're hearing. They're acting on the information. We didn't ask them how they voted. That wasn't the point. The point was, were they acting on the information that they heard?
Yeah, and I think that's a great illustration. I think because obviously on the heels of the election was a good. I mean, are we being effective? Are what our message allowing people to say, "Hey, this is a worldview. This is the way I can filter things through Scripture, through the biblical principles, and I can make day-to-day decisions." And again, however somebody voted, the fact that they're involved or they say, yes, it did make a difference, is vital, I think, because again, otherwise we're just an entertainment industry, just like everybody else. If it's not going to make a difference, then what's the point? So what do you see as far as, you mentioned continuing the study? What are you looking for? What is your expectations of what you're seeing, or what would you like to learn more now that you've got this base of information? What else are you looking for or would like to see?
Well, we're going to drill down into that impact side of Christian media. Now that we kind of know the depth and how deep Christian media is, and who's, tuning in, then, is that having an impact? And the reason I'm looking for that information is, if you go back, I'm kind of a Christian history, buff. That's my, one of my big hobbies is I love to look at all things in Christian history. So if you go back in America and you look at the Great Awakenings, the first, second, and even third Great Awakenings that happened in this country, they were really characterized by kind of three things. First, they were characterized by a really solid preaching and just an honest giving of the word. That's what really started it all. Second, they were characterized by a repentance that they saw in society. People really kind of came in. But the real evidence of that repentance was the fact that people were living out their Christian lives and their worldview. For example, one of the things during the Second Great Awakening in New York City that New York City saw was, without any laws being enacted or put in place, they saw bars and brothels and houses of ill repute just close up across the city, not because the city outlawed them, but they had no clients. They had no customers. Nobody was coming to that. That was an impact of the Great Awakening had on society, and you saw that throughout the country. And so we're trying to look at, how's the impact of Christianity having in people living out their daily lives? Is it making a difference in their daily lives? And that's one of the things we want to drill down into.
Wow, that's great. And I again, you and I would be the same on this big history buff on how things are affected. And that's where I think, I was interested in seeing how, when you mentioned it affected politics, sometimes I feel like if people think, oh, if we elect the right officials, pass the right laws, we'll clean everything up. But the reality is the message that we're supposed to be broadcasting, we're supposed to be getting out, that change lives make a bigger difference than a government saying, outlawing something. When someone says, well, you don't have to make a law against it, I'm not going to do that because God's changed my life. I think that is very important. And I feel like that's why that when we're seeing, and we're seeing it from us, that younger audience, we're seeing it. They're responding. They're just, they want to know the truth. They want to have this impact in their lives. So obviously we want to get that message out. So with that being said, we've obviously said this younger generation, they're on their phones, they're on their media, this is how they're consuming information. So I'm going to ask the big question, how does this affect what would be considered traditional media, whether it's broadcast radio, broadcast TV, or other means of that? Where do you see all of that playing into maybe the next generation of the future, or where we're at with that? What does that look like to you guys?
Well, again, just to go on your last point real quick, like you said, I think it's living out because we're seeing other studies that are telling us young men are going back to church or rejoining the church. We're seeing Bible sales are up. We're seeing, of course, some of the revivals around the country on student campuses. But again, it goes back to this for Christian ministries. In having a multi-generational strategy means you also have a multiple platform strategy to meet people where they're at. Traditional broadcasting is by far, by any means, not dead. Audiences actually have been shown lately to be growing on radio in particular. So radio audiences are very strong, and you don't want to just jump over and leave that audience behind. What you want to do, and Christians have been great innovators and leaders in this. I have to say this from the beginning because we're really driven by that message of hope of the gospel. That drives us into innovation. It's not a consumer kind of message or a consumer driver that's going there. It's a real message to save and meet people's lives. So Christians have done a good job of having both traditional radio platforms, digital platforms, but like I said, now they have to get in and figure out, and this is where you're going to have to bring some of those Gen Zers on board, get people on board who can meet people where they're at, know how the different generations talk, know how they communicate, and know who the influencers are. Christian influencers in these generations are really growing. They have some huge followings and huge audiences. What we have to do is help come alongside, mentor them, and also help to keep them to a solid Orthodox theology.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's exactly where I feel like, we want to jump into that media, obviously not neglecting, the traditional media, because there is a growing audience, and we're seeing that as well, seeing more of a growth in the radio, people that are actually listening to the radio with that. But again, the evidence that we're seeing, I appreciate you saying this, is we do have to, as an older generation, not be, I don't understand this new generation. Well, we got to still figure out how do we communicate in such a way in which, again, that orthodoxy, the biblical truths, the absolutes, keep them in there so that they grow. Again, the experience that we have, the Bible's clear. We're supposed to be teaching the younger, but at the same time, they're going to be the ones reaching their generation a whole lot easier than we are. So finding that one or two that we can mentor and to disciple and have them reach it, I think is crucial. Well, I appreciate you taking some time. I appreciate what the National Religious Broadcasters, what you guys are doing now, what you've done historically. It is a huge help to us to be able to have a resource to be able to go to be a part of it. And again, the convention every year, it's so enjoyable to be around others of like-mindedness, not only from a biblical standpoint, but also from understanding, hey, the media is a way to reach out there. So thank you for being a part of this, being a part of the organization, and having a vision for the future. So many organizations think, hey, we're so good, we don't have to change anything. But I appreciate you guys looking into this. So you mentioned doing additional studies. What does that look like, and when do you expect to maybe get some more information out to us and to the public?
Well, we're going to be putting some more out on this study, some of the deeper dive into it over the summer and throughout the end of the year. We'll keep releasing things. We're looking at doing a study annually, releasing it at the NRB convention. But look, you can track all that we do at nrb.org. So if you go to our main website there, nrb.org, you can see and all the latest things, all the legislative fights we have going on and legal battles and other things. And also have a lot of connections for resources that you do if you're thinking about getting into Christian ministry, Christian communications. Or look, today the average Facebook user reaches over 400 people in their network of influence. So I say everybody's a Christian communicator. And if you just want to even know how to do that better. And then, of course, the annual convention will be in February in Nashville, Tennessee, the 17th through the 20th. Even if you're not a so-called radio, television, Christian media professional, you're gonna learn a lot, and you might see people like your favorite radio host walking around the halls of the NRB, and it's just a great place to be at. But you can find all of that on nrb.org.
Thank you again. Appreciate that. Yes, we want to encourage everybody to be a part of that. I do know for organizations like us who join the NRB, but is there some things that people can do to get on maybe a mailing list, or can they find that at there as well?
At nrb.org, you can find that. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter that talks about what's going on in the Christian media world. You can also sign up for our Washington Next Week newsletter to understand all the things that are going on in the legislative kind of governance, legal areas there. So you have two newsletters you can sign up for there and keep in touch with what's going on.
Fantastic. Excited what's coming up, what's going on. Thank you guys for really, again, doing this study and getting this information out to us. Appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for taking a few minutes with us.
Well, thank you for having me today. Keep up the good work that you all are doing.
Thank you.